Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayanam Namaskritya Narang Chaiva Narottamam Deving Saraswating Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet Nashta Prayeshva Padreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Nashtaki. Continuing with Prahlad's prayers, Canto 7, Chapter 9, Text 31. Tvang va idam sadasat isha bhavang stato nyo maya yad atma parabuddhir iyam yapartha yadyasya janma nitanam stitir ikshanam cha tadvaita eva vasukalavat ashtitarvoho. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. My dear Lord, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, the entire cosmic creation is caused by you, and the cosmic creation is an effect of your energy. Although the entire cosmos is but you alone, you keep yourself aloof from it. The conception of, quote, mine and yours is certainly a type of illusion, maya, because everything is an emanation from you and is therefore not different from you. Indeed, the cosmic manifestation is non-different from you, and the annihilation is also caused by you. This relationship between your lordship and the cosmos is illustrated by the example of the seed and the tree, or the subtle cause and the gross manifestation. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita 7.10, the Lord says, Bijang mang sarva bhutanam vitti partha sanatanam. O son of Pritha, know that I am the original seed of all existences. In the Vedic literature it is said, Ishavasya midang sarvang yatova imani bhutani jayante and sarvam kalvidam brahma. All this Vedic information indicates that there is only one God and there is nothing else but Him. The Mayavadi philosophers explain this in their own way, but the Supreme Personality of Godhead asserts the truth that He is everything and yet is separate from everything. This is the philosophy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is called Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. Everything is one, the Supreme Lord, yet everything is separate from the Lord. This is the understanding of oneness and difference. The example given in this regard, Vasukalavat Ashtitarvoho, is very easy to understand. Everything exists in time, yet there are different phases of the time factor, present, past, and future. Present, past, and future are one. Every day we can experience the time factor as morning, noon, and evening. And although morning is different from noon, which is different from evening, all of them taken together are one. The time factor is the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the Lord is separate from the time factor. Everything is created, maintained, and annihilated by time. But the Supreme Lord, the Personality of Godhead, has no beginning and no end. He is Nitya Shashvataha, eternal, permanent. Everything passes through time's phases of present, past, and future, yet the Lord is always the same. Thus there is undoubtedly a difference between the Lord and the cosmic manifestation, but actually they are not different. Accepting them to be different is called avidya, ignorance. True oneness, however, is not equivalent to the conception of the Mayavadis. The true understanding is that the differences are manifested by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The seed is manifested as a tree, which displays varieties in its trunk, branches, leaves, flowers, and fruits. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has therefore sung, Keshava Tuya Jagata Vichitra. My dear Lord, your creation is full of varieties. The varieties are one and at the same time different. This is the philosophy of Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. The conclusion given in Brahma Samhita is this: Ishvarav Paramah Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam. Quote, Krishna, known as Govinda, is the supreme controller. He has an eternal blissful spiritual body. He is the origin of all. He has no other origin, for he is the prime cause of all causes. End quote. Because the Lord is the supreme cause, everything is one with him. But when we consider varieties, we find that one thing is different from another. We may conclude, therefore, that there is no difference between one thing and another, yet in varieties there are differences. In this regard, Madhvacharya gives an example concerning a tree and fire. Both trees are the same, but they look different because of the time factor. The time factor is under the control of the Supreme Lord, and therefore the Supreme Lord is different from time. An advanced devotee consequently does not distinguish between happiness and distress. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 10.14.8, Tatenukampam susamikshamano punjana evatna kritam vipakam. When a devotee is in a condition of so-called distress, they consider it a gift or blessing from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When a devotee is always thus situated in Krishna consciousness in any condition of life, they are described as mukti pade siddhaya bhak, a perfect candidate for turning home back to Godhead. The word daya bhak means inheritance. A son inherits the property of their father. Similarly, when this devotee is fully Krishna conscious, undisturbed by dualities, they are sure that they will return home back to Godhead, just as one inherits his father's property. Jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Om Jnanatimirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschati Deshatanane Vanchakalpatarupshascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So, Prahlad has identified that Krishna only acts in the material world, ultimately to please his devotees. And in the previous verse, he's pointed out that the Lord is transcendental to the creation, and it depends on him. So we talked about how, Krishna manifests in the material world, even in the material energy, apparently. We kind of found the catchphrase, magic is real, because Krishna is the source of everything. And in this verse, actually, today, verse 31, after having established that Krishna is different from the creation, but it's dependent on him, this verse really focuses on how it's also, at the same time, completely one with him. Prahlad really puts to rest the entire conception of I and mine. These are the cornerstones of the false ego, right? The root cause of our existence in material consciousness is this false ego. This idea that I am separate, and I am the controller, and I own things. This is I, this body, generally, and of course, beyond that, the material mind. And these things are mine in association with this body and mind. These ideas are my ideas. This is my property. This is my family, etc., etc. It expands. And it's the root cause. Its insistence on this point of view is the root cause of our material persistence. This is why our material existence goes on the way it does. And Prahlad's putting it to rest. He's saying, how can there be I and mine when everything that exists is you and yours? There is nothing else. And so this has to be understood properly, because the misunderstanding of this is the root cause of what Prabhupada is criticizing as Mayavad. So, historically, in trying to appreciate the relationship between the material world and the source, different philosophical approaches are there. Some stress the difference, some stress oneness, and sometimes a philosophy actually brings both up and puts them together and has them both be honored. Now, if you take an honest, unbiased reading of the Vedas, meaning the Upanishads, which are from the Vedas. They're the actual philosophical portion of the Vedas, and not just like ritual or, mantras for glorification of different demigods. They're the philosophy of the Vedas. If one reads them, one will find very clearly both Bheda and Abheda Tattva. Statements indicating the difference of the Lord with the material creation, and statements indicating his non-difference. Both. And the problem is, if you take only one of those things, you gain something, which is that it's easier. It's simpler for the mind. The materially conditioned mind can appreciate if you just take, oh, the Lord is completely different from the creation, or everything is completely one with the Lord. It's simpler, but you lose something very, very important. And historically, this kind of compromise has ended up creeping into every single spiritual tradition, every single one. It has to. Why? Because it's intellectually simpler. And it leaves room for our own false ego to insert itself. I'll demonstrate. Because every single spiritual tradition indicates that we're all one with the Lord and also we're separate, and because this is difficult to understand, and because we have at the same time this persistent desire to have our own sense of independent existence, there's like pressure over time to adjust this philosophy. What happens practically, you can see, if everything is completely separate from the Lord, then yeah, we have to honor him. Generally, it's done in a mode of fear, because how can we relate to such a person? He's completely different than us. He's not actually a person in such a point of view. We can't see him as a person because we're persons. Mm-hmm. Our false ego will not allow ourselves to be something that he is at the same time under such a system. If we're completely different, and our false ego asserts that we're people, because that's what the false ego does. I'm an enjoyer, but God's not an enjoyer. Whatever he is inconceivable. I have a form, but God doesn't have a form. Whatever he is inconceivable. There's no form, right? Mm-hmm. So we're fearful because he's completely foreign to us. His motivations are foreign to us. Everything about him is foreign to us. And very conveniently, since everything is different from him, I can plant my flag anywhere I want in this world and own it for myself, because that's also different from him. It's not his world anymore, right? This is a corruption of original understanding, is that we move the goalposts. First we start with everything is one with the Lord and it's different from him. Then we say, no, everything is different from him. And so now I can own this. Now I can do whatever I want to that person. Do whatever I want to my own body or the world, because it's different. It's not divine anymore. This is actually exactly what has happened to the philosophical underpinnings of Western modern world in the last 500 years since the Enlightenment, is that we've stopped actually appreciating that there's anything divine in the world because everything is separate from God. And then it got to the point where, like, don't even talk about God. We're just talking about what's observable. You know, it used to be that you could talk about God and matter, and that was called education. And then it was just like, no, they're very, very, very separate. And then it became so separate, then God is just for ritual, and we don't even talk about him anymore. You know, it's impolite to talk about him. Let's just talk about matter. That's how far we've gone to separate. So that's what happens if you separate God from material reality. If you merge everything, collapse all the categories, you get a different kind of problem, right? Which is that I am God. I am literally God. And isn't that a wonderful treat for the false ego? Because, of course, I thought everything revolved around me. And it does, because I'm actually God. And you can see how this can be a problem. This can be a problem, because it's just like feeding, as Prabhupada pointed out a recent report, feeding milk to a snake doesn't actually pacify the snake. It just increases their venom. You've done nothing to address your false ego. You've just filled it up, you know? And so the Vedas, the Upanishads, they do point out we are one with God. We're not different from him. But if you just take that in isolation, it's not just intellectually inappropriate or dishonest. It's a prop for one's own false ego. It's a prop. That's why Prabhupada calls it the last snare of Maya. Because it's not wrong. In a way, we are God. But in another way, we're also never going to be God. And if we can't understand that or don't want to, we're just giving into our false ego. So the Brahmavadis or Mayavadis, persons who very, very carefully and austerely eliminate any conception of difference between material reality, including their own constructed ego, and the source, Brahman, if they do that and they come to a point of oneness, but they don't actually appreciate the greatness of the Supreme Person, Bhagavan, if they don't come to that, then their ego remains unblunted and can cut down their own advancement. Their ego remains impure. They're not actually situated in proper oneness. Proper oneness is the oneness of relationship, right? So here's the magical thing. If we're completely different than God, there's no relationship. There can't be. Right? Think about it. And actually, it's not hard to understand this because almost everybody I've talked to has come to Krishna consciousness because of this. Because they want a relationship with God, and nobody else that they could find is teaching them how to have it. Right? It doesn't mean that Krishna consciousness is the sole place you can find it. That's not true. It means that we're in Kali Yuga, and spiritual traditions are corrupted. And in a lot of places, they stress difference to the point where, like, I can't have a relationship with that. What is that anyway? You know, what does he look like? What am I and what do we have in common? You know, there's no relationship. And if we're completely one with God, guess what? There's no relationship. That's the problem. And so Mayavadis say, oh, we're actually experiencing oneness. This is perfection of oneness. It's all about oneness. You don't understand oneness, oneness, oneness. And the devotees say, you don't even know what oneness is. This is elementary oneness, to merge and become the non-different from the divine. Real oneness is, once you're non-different from the divine, how do you relate to that divine? How do you actually relate to that same source that you're not different from? And that's personhood. Spiritual personhood. Because in spiritual personhood, you don't become the sugar cube, you taste the sugar cube. There's an exchange of sweetness. You taste the sweetness of Krishna, the supreme totality of everything, and he tastes the sweetness of you, the infinitesimal part and parcel of that same totality, who's also infinite at the same time. Because we're no longer limited by our material conditions. We're no longer limited by, this body. We're not relating to Krishna on the basis of this body, which has a beginning and an end, this mind, which has a beginning and an end. We have a pure ego. We have a pure existence, a pure relationship. That's real oneness. That's real oneness. That's why we hanker for a relationship. That's why no other form of relationship can satisfy, and never will. Only relationships based with Krishna in the center. Relationships with devotees, relationships with the Guru, relationship with the Dham, relationship with the name, relationship with the deity, relationship with Prasad, relationship with Kirtan. These are all ineffable. These are all heart-touching because of their own level of Brahman, oneness. Still there's relationship there. It's tugging at some part of us we don't know. Where is this coming from? Why does this touch me so much? Why do when I come to Kishori Gopi's Kirtans, we say, why is this different than every other musical experience? It's because Krishna's there. This is a different kind of relationship. This is something impersonalists don't know, right? So you can't collapse all the categories because there's no relationship. You can't separate all the categories because there's no relationship. You actually have to have both. And that's why Bhagavatam has both. Prahlad is not a Mayavadi, and yet in these verses, there are several places where he's saying, there's no difference between you and the source, and you and the effect, just like the tree and the seed, no difference. And at the same time, he's saying there's difference. So, Bhagavatam is full of this. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he taught this as what Prabhupada is calling Achintya Bheda Abheda Tattva. Tattva means the truth of, or the science of, Achintya, inconceivable oneness and difference. We're one with the Lord and we're different from him. And that's inconceivable because it doesn't make sense materially. Because there's no example in the material world of that being true, right? But Prabhupada's using analogies, the tree and the seed, the father and their children, right? The cause and the effect. Everything that's in the effect came from the cause. But at the same time, there's a separate existence, right? The bodies of the children come from the bodies of the parents. But at the same time, they take on their own existence. There's some differences now. So we see that there is something approaching this in our experience. And it's important not to try necessarily to wrestle with this philosophically, but to notice if we are giving in to the false ego. Because that's really where the problems come in, is that we can start to consider ourselves completely different from God on the basis of the false ego. Usually for sincere devotees, what happens is it's not that necessarily, I'll put it this way, for sincere devotees trying to practice bhakti, the false ego asserts itself like this: I'm so fallen, I can't practice bhakti. I can't chant the holy name purely. I'm not good enough, right? It's like, yeah, Krishna is everything, but I'm separate from him. He can give his mercy everywhere, but I'm in some other island somewhere, right? The holy name is perfect. Yeah, I'm not arguing that, but I just can't chant it. Yeah, I'm so great that my nonsense is greater than the holy name's ability to bring me into the circle of mercy. Like some way in which the ego asserts itself so that we don't actually practice. We don't actually feel motivation to practice. Like, why should I practice? I'm fallen. I'll never be anything else. It's like, yeah, well, you say that, but you're forgetting that you're one with Krishna. You forget that's who you are. You actually are Satchidananda. All this other stuff, you're not a human being having a spiritual experience. You're a spiritual being having a material experience. That's how the false ego asserts itself. It's like, no. I'm actually I'm the hot dog vendor. I'm this old. I'm son of this or daughter of that. Like, that's who I am. No. That's your dream. The real thing is you're a devotee. So that's how it can assert itself, right? Is you want to watch out if the false ego is coming up and trying to separate you from your practice. Or you want to watch out if the false ego is coming up and trying to merge you with your practice. Yes, I'm actually the divine. Or actually, I'm the greatest devotee. Right? Isn't this a wonderful treat? I can be Radharani. I can be like the actual source of all bhakti. See how I instruct all the devotees. I give them all my mercy. I give them all wisdom. Isn't that wonderful that they're getting blessings from me? Like, I'm actually the source of their benedictions. Like, no, that's also the false ego, right? Like, isn't it great how, and then you notice how that creeps in. These different flavors of our own false ego. That's all we have to do. We don't have to wrestle with how is it that Krishna is so potent that he can manifest from his own self living entities that are completely him, but at the same time, completely themselves. So they have their own choice. How is that even possible? It just is. That's the achintya part. Krishna is so great, he can manifest other greats from him. He's so great, he doesn't just sit there being great. He's like, I want to relate. And he relates with something from his own self that's actually going to surprise him. And can have his own choice, their own choice. If you want to have some mental gymnastics, you can play around with that. But the main thing is for us as devotees to see, like, am I cutting myself off from Krishna's mercy? Or am I trying to claim it inappropriately? One way or the other. Am I trying to, on some level, separate myself from Krishna improperly? Or am I trying to claim that I am him improperly? And one way or the other, it's going to manifest as an excuse for not practicing bhakti, for not being in our relationship, for not trying to relate sincerely, right? That's how it's going to manifest. If that's manifesting, we know that we're on some level we're starting to drift, which is totally normal, by the way. That's the thing about having a false ego is like we're transforming that to the real ego. But while we're doing that, it's going to assert itself and be like, yeah, but I'm still used to thinking of myself as separate and trying to create my own happiness. So let me just try to create my own happiness in this way or in that flavor or in that regard. So verses like this are the medicine, because Prahlad has his own distinct relationship with Krishna, and yet he doesn't have this disease of seeing anything as separate from him. And it if we live that way, the way that Prahlad's living, we come to the point at the end of the purport where Prabhupada's talking about, and quoting 10.14.8 Bhagavatam, a devotee doesn't actually care anymore whether there's suffering or distress, material suffering or distress. They don't actually see it as different. They can appreciate the distinctions. They're not in without sensibility. They can know, yeah, this is what's called distress. This is called happiness. I understand. My body and mind are still going through what they're going through, but I actually am fully convinced this is Krishna. That's Krishna, and this is Krishna. That's the reality of a very advanced devotee, and that's the reality of somebody who's what Prabhupada is calling Siddhaya Bhak. So they've earned the inheritance of going back to Godhead. That's what that verse says. 10.14.8. Really classic verse. You can look at it if you want to know in the purport. If you want to know about what it's like to live in the material world and come to the point of seeing everything that's coming to you as just Krishna. It's that perfect vision. So Prahlad is like that, and we saw that because he went through actual hell. He was tortured by his father, acts of child abuse that would drive any child into, trauma. But he didn't go into a trauma response. He didn't have any kind of material response. Someone who went through that would require years and years of therapy to even function.
Yeah.
This is not on the table for him. Why? Because he's not a materially conditioned soul. His guru took him to another level. He is existing transcendentally. This is a stunning display, right? How a child can do this. How little girls growing up in a village can have this kind of wisdom. How these kinds of barriers are broken down is because of a transcendental personhood. Liberation in bhakti breaks down all possibilities. So the personality continues to exist, but it doesn't function in any way we can make sense of. A child is doing this? A child is giving instructions like this? He's like immune to his own father trying to cut his head off? Like, how is that possible? Because he sees this is just one flavor or another of Krishna's energy. That's not a mental gymnastics thing. That's a function of his development of relationship. So devotees don't sit around trying to figure out how it's possible. That's the Mayavadi way. I'll do austerities. I'll purify my heart of any sense of difference. I will take on all kinds of suffering. I'll go walk into cold water in the winter, sit surrounded by fire in the summer, until I can realize that there's no difference between one sensation and another. It's all just energy. That's not our path. Don't seek out unhappiness, and don't have to seek out happiness either. It's going to come one way or the other. Just try to practice bhakti. Try to give yourself in your relationship. And by doing that, your relationship with matter will change necessarily. And you can see that. We already see that in our own lives, that we're less dominated by the insatiable need for material pleasure, and we're less dominated by the insatiable fear of material pain. Right? That happens very, very quickly in bhakti. It's like, oh, this is cool. Chanting is taking away my anxiety. What's anxiety? Anxiety is the specter of material suffering. What if I go home and my dog has died and my parents have died, and what if I saw it in a horror movie? What if it happens to me? Right? That's anxiety, right? The unspoken horror of material suffering. It's like, well, I'm not feeling as much anxiety since I went to kirtan. What is that? It's like, yeah, you're starting to realize it doesn't matter. You'll continue to exist. They continue to exist. There is no loss. We're all one, right? You're still a person. It's okay. It's going to be okay. And the insatiable thirst, I gotta have food and sex, and I gotta be adored, and I gotta have wealth. Oh my God, anymore. All that starts to blunt. It's like, I still kind of want that, but not as much, and I'm not dominated by it. And I have intermittent periods where I actually don't think about it. That's kind of cool, interesting, and new, because my whole life I've been thinking about all those things, and I couldn't stop. Just in the beginnings of practicing bhakti. So in practicing it more and more, all those dualities become less and less relevant. You look at Prabhupada. Prabhupada's walking through, he had a lockdown happen to him in South Africa, by the way, or East Africa. He was thrown into prison for 7 days because they thought he had red fever or whatever, because his servant forgot to get the stamp to show that he got the vaccine. So they're like, we can't let you out till you're out of quarantine. So we went through that. He went to communist Russia. He went to New York City in the middle of winter, knowing nobody, with no money. He gets 2 hours of sleep a night. He gets, my body's talking to him, and devotees like leaving the movement and stealing money, and like someone like betraying him and leaving, and his godbrother's not helping, and political situation this and this and that, and it's like he just goes on. This is what devotees, this is what Prahlad did, and we can see and be like, I don't know how I can do that. And the answer is just do what they're doing, follow in their footsteps. That's how they got there, is by thickening their relationship with their guru and Krishna until it's like, I don't care. I don't care. I don't care what you throw at me. I'm not going to stop my service. And we can see that with his disciples. Prabhupada's disciples are doing this. We can see it with some of his grand disciples. They're living like that. It's like, oh yeah, like their mission actually is everything, like distributing books or distributing prasadam or like science preaching or making friends with people and helping them practice bhakti, like whatever it is that they've done. They continue to do, like they don't care. They lose an arm, they get a stroke, there's COVID, what this happens in their family, or they lose all their, they don't, nothing stops them. Nothing really changes. Or they win the lottery, or I guess they wouldn't be playing lottery tickets, but so they get some like kind of positive windfall, like that's cool, let's use some Krishna service. And so that's what we want. That's what we want to be, because all this running around after drama, it's a waste of time and energy. So this deep philosophy boils down to us into am I buying into any kind of message that will get me to stop practicing bhakti? It can be a message of oneness or a message of difference. One way or another, am I buying the hype for my false ego? And if I am, I need to check that. Balance that out, right? Either I'm not everything, stop trying to be like, the greatest of everything, stop trying to be God, just be the servant. Or I'm not my own, fallen situation. I'm not matter. I'm actually divine. And I need you to help me see that Krishna. I need you to help me see that Krishna's name, devotees, bhakti, deities. Please help me recognize my own divine nature and come back to practicing bhakti. And bit by bit, we come to seeing material suffering and material pleasure as just two different flavors of irrelevance in Krishna's energy. So those are some thoughts, hopefully boiling down this deep philosophy, and it's very deep. It has incredible implications. I talked a little bit about what's happened in science and religion as a consequence of like losing our way in terms of Achinte Beta Beta Tattva. It's very deep, but boiling it down to our daily lives so we can actually apply it and see, am I living as if I'm one with and different from God, or am I living run by my own false ego? So let's get some reflections here and churn some of this. What did you hear?
Can you just tell me what you were reading from again? I missed that.
Yeah. The
Thank
verse
you.
number
Yeah.
is 7-9-31.
Thank you.
What did you hear? Yes, Nancy.
Thank you so much. There's so many things were swirling in my mind.
Same.
It's pretty, you went in so many different places, although at least I went in so many different places based on what you were saying. But one of the things that really sunk in for me was, if I'm simultaneously one and different from Krishna, so are you. Therefore, this relationship that I want to and I yearn to cultivate with Krishna by honoring Krishna and trying to do service and trying to see what my mission in life is, to be able to do Krishna's mission. I also have to see how I interact with people around me, regardless of whether or not they're Krishna conscious. That I have to. You may not know I don't know if this is how other people think, but I keep on thinking that everybody's a devotee. They may not know it, but at some point, Krishna will get them. Krishna will come along in whatever generation that they come, and therefore I have to treat even the people who have a message that it's sort of hateful and not so nice as if they're a child of Krishna, and therefore with as much respect as I can do, as well as sometimes having to establish proper boundaries so that I don't get hurt and fall down in some way. But the idea that I can sometimes beat myself up, have a shame hit, that is I've learned has come from some dysfunction in my history of my family and etc. Really is really tearing Krishna apart when I start beating myself up, and it's not okay. I have to just say, as you know, understanding that I can come to a place maybe over many lifetimes of seeing the positive and the negative as being just there. That's just what there's no difference between them, the light and the dark, or the good and the bad. That I have to really be conscious of not going to a place of essentially disrespecting Krishna by cutting myself down. But I also have to be somebody who's very aware of not pumping myself up, thinking that, I'm all that, yeah, well, Krishna's inside of me, therefore, I got the way and just follow me and you'll be okay, And I think that that's sometimes what confuses me in any kind of religion about the man-made um, constructs that form around different religions and say, well, is that really what God has expectations about, or is this what you as taking on the idea that you are God are creating this structure? So it's a lot I've been thinking about. So thank you very much, Shanma Prasad. I've got a lot to think about. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot in that reflection. That thank you. I heard you say that seeing everybody as a devotee, whether they're practicing or they know it, or who knows how long it'll take to manifest. That's actually truth. It's actually truth. As Prabhupada's using the time analogy, right? The only thing that, in fact, there was a famous example from his own life. Prabhupada, when he first came to New York City in 1965, he didn't have anything and nothing was manifest. And he was sitting with somebody, I forget, what was that? It was like a park bench or something. The person came later when ISKCON manifested and Prabhupada had become a world acharya.
Taxi driver.
Was it a taxi driver?
I think so.
And they were saying that your Swamiji was sitting and telling me how all these things are there, all these buildings and deities and devotees and kirtan, and he said the only thing that is separating is time. He knew that he may live to see it, or he may not, but he had full confidence that Lord Chaitanya wants this. He had no doubts about that. He's like, I may be the one to see this happen on this continent for the first time, or I may not, but I know that this is what Lord Chaitanya wants. The only thing that's separating it is time. And of course, he did get to see it. He was instrumental. So it's really practical for us because, advancing devotees, one of the things that makes them advancing is that they're very careful. They're very careful how they deal with living entities. The more conditioned someone is, the more careless they are with other living entities. That's a hallmark of being covered by the modes, is that one is careless with oneself and with other living entities. Then one starts to get careful about themselves, but not other living entities. And then one's careful at everybody, like really everybody. And then one is actually loving to everybody. You see someone, you're like, wow, look at that. There's a soul. There's a little Krishna bit right in there. Isn't that amazing? That's pretty special. And they treat them like that. Like Prabhupada treated all the weirdos and druggies and thugs and confused people coming in. It's like, yeah, you don't know yet, but you're actually divine, and here's how you can find out. And so in practice, it's really helpful for us to see how we're dealing with other living entities, because that's often one of the main flexion points is am I making advancement or am I degrading myself? Is how am I dealing with Krishna's parts and parcels? Because he wants us to practice bhakti and go back to Godhead, but he wants all of them just as much, right? Which is also evidence for why the organization of our own culture in ISKCON and Lord Chaitanya's family of sharing bhakti being so important, why that makes so much sense. Because it's what if I could just get myself up back home Or what if I could help other people to get back home too? What's more pleasing to Krishna? The math is pretty simple. Yeah. Hare Krishna. Yes.
Wasn't thinking about this, but Nancy's reflection made me think of this. So, in the Christian tradition, in the New Testament, Jesus is asked, like, what is the most important commandment? And he comes back with the golden rule, which I love because Lord Chaitanya was golden. But he said, love the Lord God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? And so it's like that idea of bhakti and that idea of like, if we're part of the divine and we are trying to treat ourselves with, compassion and love because we are part of Krishna, therefore we also need to do that with our neighbor. So I think, in some of the purest senses of different religions and paths, I think that is a theme that, that God is foremost, and, and God's children are all the same. So I love being reminded of kind of my upbringing with that. I think when I was listening to talk, it was just such a beautiful, awesome class. I felt like I was like back in philosophy class. So thank you, because it was really, I really enjoyed it. Also, though, it made me think of being in school and being, a student of philosophy and theology and literature. And I think I always had the idea that like, I am going to learn all this stuff and I'm going to learn how to think and I'm going to learn how to reason and I'm going to figure it all out. Right. And, while it did teach me how to ask good questions, I really felt like I was going to get really smart and then I was going to know all the things. Right. And I love your comment about how it's not mental gymnastics and figuring it out, but it's the development of the relationship with Krishna, and how reading him and his pastimes, reading how the queens in Canto 10 talk to the mountains and the streams and the ocean as if, they were Krishna. Seeing Krishna everywhere is really how this true love develops. And I really love that. It's like, okay, ego, like it doesn't matter how smart you are, you're never going to figure it out. The whole point of this is to develop this deep love, and that's the connection point, not that you figured it out.
Yeah, that's a really nice example. The gopis and the queens, they're seeing everything and all living entities as Krishna's devotees. In fact, they saw them as better devotees than themselves. They're like, oh, my dear, deer, like a female and male deer. They'll be like, I see a couple of deer, like, oh, you must have seen Krishna, you're a more advanced devotee than me, they were saying. The gopis were saying, because they were saying, oh, you must be a more advanced devotee because you can practice bhakti with your spouse. We can't do that. Our spouses won't let us be with Krishna because we're not as fortunate as you. You can practice and have children and have your little, dear husband and see Krishna. You must be a great soul. So please tell us where he's gone, because we miss him so much and we're being destroyed by our own sense of separation from him. And what a vision, right? Like, they're walking through a forest and they're like begging the flowers. It's like, it's crazy person behavior. But it's not, because actually it's in relationship to Krishna. They're like begging all the parts and parcels of the universe, connect me more with Krishna. And they're actually the most qualified to connect anybody with Krishna. They're like stunned by their own feeling of separation. So the upshot for us is that we want to come to a place of like walking around and like, thinking that these are parts and parcels of Krishna and relating to them. Maybe not exactly like that, but seeing that there is a divine connection. And it's an interesting one, like and a very relevant one, for most people, and for me too, that whole thing of not giving into the intellectual impulse to figure things out, right? Because that's pretty much what school teaches you. And it's not a bad thing if you take it to a certain extent, because if you never try to figure anything out, you stay in tamas. Rajas means trying to figure things out using distinction, differentiation, what's better, what's worse materially. But we're not aiming at material things anymore. We're aiming at Krishna, and Rajas won't help. Mm-hmm. So you actually have to surrender. And they don't teach that in schools. They teach that in the Bhagavatam. They teach that in the culture of bhakti. And it's so different. Mm-hmm. And that always ends up being important because, but I'm so intelligent. I can figure it out. It's like, yeah, well, how far has that gotten us in actually understanding God? Oh, so I mean, it's a species, really. I don't see any great thinkers who figured it. Did Nietzsche figure out God? No. Like, did any great, philosopher, can they show us the face of God? No. They had to have surrendered. Anywhere, everywhere, someone surrendered, they could start to actually see God. He'll show himself. That's what we're going for. We're not going for like some miserable, pathetic, material goal. We're going for God, the supreme person. And that requires softness of heart.
Thank you for class, Shamya. Really wonderful. I love listening to you share and explain and distill the essence from these amazing ancient texts. And I was thinking about how, you were sharing how, one camp is all oneness, one camp's all difference. And it's like this way that at least Western world, in many ways, it's like things are black and white. And even how we relate to ourselves is black and white. This is right, this is wrong. I want this, I don't want this, attraction, aversion. And how both of those, you said either one of those is an excuse to not sincerely relate to Krishna, right? Whether we're in the false ego or, of I'm not qualified, I'm worthless, this won't work for me, or I'm the best devotee ever, right? And how our philosophy, I speak often of like how there's actually a whole gray area. It's not, life is not black and white, right? And I understand that, and I felt that for some time, but didn't know how to necessarily integrate that, right? So I love and so appreciate how our philosophy does, right? It's like actually there is the gray, there is the liminal space, there is the space between, and it can be very clear, and it so clearly maps it out, but it isn't just black or white. And it's inclusive in that way of like, that's how you're relating to God right now. The gods in the universe, like the three ways that we relate to God in bhakti, right? That's okay. Like there's a place for you here, right? Or you relate to God in your heart, but that's okay. That's a place for you here. You relate to God as a person. That's ultimately what we're aiming for. And, of course there's a place for you here. So just this, like, I was hearing and having appreciation for really how inclusive our path is and this philosophy is, and it actually explains that in my mind, which is quote been that gray area, that space between black and white.
Yeah. In a broader sense, this is one of the main distinctions between modern thinking and the Vedic intellectual paradigm, which is that modern thinking is very polar, black and white. And that's it's so built in that we take it for granted. This or that, night or day, male or female, happy or sad, as if happiness and sadness can't exist at the same time, or it can be neither happy nor sad. In the intellectual framework of this tradition is that it can be A or B, or A and B, or neither A nor B.
Yeah.
Right? It's a matrix, 2 by 2. It's not just 1 or 2. It's how do they relate to each other. Is A and B both true? Is only one of them true, or are neither of them true? Those 4 possibilities, now not 2. And so there's nuance, right?
Yeah.
And then if there's more things, then there's more nuance, and so it's really tempting to simplify things into right and wrong, this or that, left wing, right wing, good or bad. And of course, in Kali Yuga, that's the impetus. There's more and more like polarized discussions. Everything is super polarized. Politics is incredibly polarized. The culture wars are very polarized. Like that's what people are trying to do to each other, is to get them to exist on a pole. Are you good or are you bad? Are you with us or are you against us? And intelligent people pause and reflect, like, where's the nuance in this situation? And we're not generally taught to think in this way, even from the very beginnings of our education, because it's, think about it. It's like, you're talking about an intellectual tradition that talks about time as being a straight line. How much nuance can there be? right? This is a tradition that's talking about time as a circle. Constantly.
Yeah.
And then going back to like low rage, and then going back, you know, there's just differences that way. So there's much more nuance, and so these kinds of things, having your eyes open to like, oh wait, it could be both. It could be both this and that. That's a function of exposing yourself to, you know, Prabhupada and Bhagavatam philosophy. I remember when I started to realize that, I read an article by, not actually a non-devotee, but an appreciator of the Upanishads. I read an article by him, and he talked about this. I was like, oh my God, you're right. I have been taught that things are either A or B, and they can be both or neither. And I never thought about that until I heard it. So yeah, what a rich intellectual tradition, and it has so much applicability for ourselves because you talked about that, you know. How do you all? So even if you do want to be really intelligent, just read Prabhupada's books, because then you'll realize how intelligent you're not. Yeah. All right, Srila Prabhupada, anything else before we end? Samantha, you're good? Cool. There's something in chat? Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Sri Prahlad Maharaj ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Now let's offer our respectful obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord, who are just like desire trees, can fulfill the desires of everyone, and are full of compassion for all the fallen conditioned souls. Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Haribol. Interestingly, in connecting to Nancy's comment, we were talking about like the Vaishnava devotees. What about those who aren't devotees yet? And the 11th canto, Krishna says you can offer respects even to a dog, seeing the presence of the divine within them. Because, and if you do that, if you're in that consciousness, it's a very approved way of becoming situated in oneness with the divine. Because they may be like whatever they are, like some street dog, but that's just materially. They're actually a part and parcel of Krishna. So, in effect, we're offering obeisances to everybody. But especially those who are practicing willfully, because they're really special. Have a great day.